Okay, you guys, in this video, we're going to discuss phase changes. So your last video is probably all review for you. Some of this is probably review, and then some of it's probably brand new information. So let's get started. When a substance is changed from a solid to a liquid, and in the picture you can see there's some ice turning into water, that's called melting. Another fancy word for it is called liquefaction, which makes sense, it's turning into a liquid, right? The melting point of water is 0 degrees Celsius. So when a substance changes from a liquid to a gas, after we add heat, that process is called vaporization. That process is going to happen at the boiling point. And the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius. So what about plain old evaporation? Evaporation is what we talk about when something happens spontaneously. So I have a glass of water, maybe on my nightstand, and I've left it there for a couple days, and I notice that it gets lower. And that's because just a few of the particles on the top of the liquid have enough energy to escape and turn into a gas by itself without adding any heat. So what is the difference between evaporation and vaporization? Evaporation happens spontaneously by itself without any help, and vaporization requires heat. Sublimation, I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but what it is going from a solid straight to a gas, skipping the liquid phase altogether. Dry ice is an example of that. When a substance changes from a gas to a liquid, after the reduction of heat. So like at night, when it starts to cool off, some of the water vapor in the air will change to a liquid on the grass or on your car. That's condensation. We also have condensation on the outside of a glass. So though that liquid is not coming from inside the glass, it's coming from the water vapor in the air. When it touches the cold glass, it condensates. It changes from a gas to a liquid. So what happens if you go from a liquid to a solid with making it colder? So I think we all know that's called freezing. Another name for it, though, is called solidification. So what would happen if we went straight from a gas to a solid? And that, the technical name for it is called deposition. But you would see this in the winter time. Instead of having dew on the ground, you have frost. So we call that frost when that water is changing straight from a gas to a solid. But the technical name is deposition. Thermal expansion. The term thermal expansion refers to stuff going from solid to liquid to gas, and as they do that, they expand, they get bigger. The particles speed up, they take up more space. Okay. But when you make a tray of ice cubes, you take that tray of water and you put it in the freezer. Have you ever noticed how it gets bigger? How it might come over the top a little bit? And that is because water is different than most other things. When it goes from a liquid to a solid, which is freezing, it's going to expand instead of contract. And that has to do with how those molecules fit together. Okay, so let's talk about melting point. And the melting point and the freezing point are the same for any given substance. And at first that may not make sense to you, but let's talk about what temperature does stuff freeze. So water, for example, water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, but that's also the temperature that water will start melting. So they both exist at the same time. The condensation point and boiling point for each substance will be the same as well. So the temperature at which water boils is 100 degrees Celsius, but that's the same temperature that water vapor will start changing into a liquid. If the temperature is not increasing, where is the heat going? This is a common question that we get all the time. So we're going to do a lab about this, and I want you to see it for yourself, but when I get to 0, it's going to start melting. And it is going to stay at 0 degrees or around there until all of the ice is melted, because that energy, the heat that you add to it, is going to go into melting it, changing it from a solid to a liquid instead of warming it up.